What happens when unchecked arrogance meets unimaginable power? This isn't just a story about racism. It's a story about consequences. We've all seen the viral videos a customer being mistreated an airline employee on a power trip. But what if the person they chose to humiliate, to physically drag across a crowded airport terminal like a common criminal, wasn't just another passenger? What if she was the one who owned the very ground the airline needed to operate? This is the story of Dr. Imani Carter, a black CEO who, after suffering the ultimate public degradation, didn't just file a lawsuit. She rewrote the rules of an entire industry, grounding a billion-dollar airline with a single devastating phone call. Dr. Imani Carter was a creature of precision and order. Her world, meticulously constructed over 47 years, ran on schedules, data points, and the quiet, thrumming efficiency of well-managed systems. Her company, the Aerovantis Group, wasn't just in the aviation business. It was the silent architecture behind it. While giants like American Airlines and Delta fought for passengers in the sky, Aerovantis controlled the earth beneath them. They specialized in acquiring, upgrading, and managing mid-size regional airports, the crucial unglamorous arteries that fed the industry's heart. Aerovantis owned 3 such airports: outright Westwood Regional WWR in Colorado, a key hub for ski season tourism and private jets; Pinewood Aerodrome PWD in North Carolina, a vital logistics center for the tech corridor; and Silver Creek Executive Airport SCEA in Arizona, a rapidly growing nexus for corporate travel. They didn't just manage the runways, they controlled the terminals, the gate leases, the fueling contracts, the security protocols, every single revenue stream and operational lever. To land at an Aerovantis airport was to enter Imani Carter's world and play by her rules. Imani herself was the embodiment of the company she'd built from the ground up. The daughter of a mechanic and a school teacher from Detroit, she'd earned a PhD in civil engineering from MIT and had a mind that saw the world in load-bearing capacities and stress tolerances. She was tall, poised, and her gaze had a way of making people feel they were being accurately measured and often found wanting. Her daily uniform was a bespoke suit today, a sharp cobalt blue Armani that served as both armor and a statement she belonged in every room she entered. On this particular Tuesday in October, she was flying from Chicago O'Hare, ORD, to a conference in Denver. It was a routine trip. She wasn't flying private. She believed in using the commercial systems her company supported. It was a way of field testing the ecosystem. She was flying Ascend Air, a mid-tier carrier known for its aggressive expansion strategy and anecdotally for its declining customer service. They were a major lessee at her Westwood regional hub in Colorado, their most profitable mountain region destination. The relationship was functional, if not warm. Ascend Air's CEO, Richard Sterling, was a man of inherited wealth and a brash, backslapping demeanor that grated on Imani's sensibilities. They coexisted because profit dictated it. Checking in at the Ascend Air priority desk, Imani handed her passport and ticket to the agent. The young woman typed, frowned, and typed again. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There's a discrepancy." "Oh." Imani's tone was calm. "What seems to be the issue? The name on the ticket is Dr. I. Carter. The passport says Imani Jeanette Carter. Our new security protocol post-TSA update requires an exact match. The doctor and the initial are flagging the system." Imani had heard this before. It was a minor, easily solvable bureaucratic snag. "I understand. I booked it through our corporate portal, which defaults to my professional title." You can see the names match otherwise. Can you simply amend it in the system?" The agent, clearly flustered, and out of her depth shook her head. "I can't. It's locked. You'll need to go to the customer service center to have the ticket reissued." She pointed vaguely down the bustling terminal. "It's over there by gate K19. Imani glanced at her Patek Philippe watch. Boarding began in 30 minutes. The customer service line was notoriously long. "That's highly inefficient," she stated, not as a complaint, but as a diagnosis. "Surely there's a supervisor who can override this here. Our supervisor is in a briefing. You have to go to the service center." The agent repeated her voice, rising with the practiced indifference of someone who says no 100 times a day. Imani sighed a small, controlled exhale of breath. It was an annoyance, a friction point in her otherwise smooth day. She nodded, collected her documents, and began the long walk, her carry-on gliding silently behind her. She was Dr. Imani Carter, CEO of the Aerovantis Group, a woman who controlled billions in aviation infrastructure. And at that moment, she was just another passenger sent on a pointless errand by a broken system. She had no idea that this minor friction was about to ignite a firestorm. The line at the Ascendair customer service center was a portrait of misery. 20 people snaked back from a counter staffed by 2 visibly stressed employees. Imani took her place, her mind already calculating the cascading delays. She'd miss her priority boarding. She'd have to stow her bag far from her seat. Her pre-flight routine of reviewing quarterly reports would be disrupted. These were minor irritations, but they offended her deep-seated belief in efficiency. After 25 minutes, she finally reached the front. She explained the situation calmly and concisely to the agent, a man named Kevin. Kevin listened, typed, and then delivered the same verdict. "Yeah, I see the flag. The system won't let me touch it. You'll have to buy a new ticket at today's walk-up fare, and then apply for a refund for the original ticket online. The refund can take 6 to 8 weeks to process." Imani's composure for the first time began to fray. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice dropping a register, becoming colder, more precise. "You want me to pay $2,000 for a new ticket because your booking system can't reconcile a professional title that is not a solution. That is extortion." "It's policy, ma'am," Kevin said with a shrug, refusing to make eye contact. "Then your policy is predatory," Imani countered. "I need to speak with a manager, a real one. Now." This was when the second character in the drama made his entrance. He was an airport security contractor, not TSA, but one hired by Ascendair to manage their gate areas. His name tag read M. Renshaw. Mark Renshaw was a man who wore his authority like an ill-fitting suit. He was thick-set with a military-style buzz cut and a face that seemed permanently soured. He'd been a suburban cop until an internal investigation into excessive force had encouraged an early retirement. Now he channeled that same aggressive energy into policing boarding queues and baggage sizes. He had been watching Imani. He saw an expensive suit, an expensive watch, and a black woman who wasn't being deferential. In his binary world, this was an equation that equaled problem. "Is there an issue here, ma'am?" Renshaw asked, stepping up to the counter. His tone was not one of inquiry, but of accusation. "Yes," Imani said, turning to him. "Your airline's policies are preventing me from boarding my flight due to a trivial clerical error, and your staff's proposed solution is to charge me again for a service I've already purchased." "Kevin, what's the problem?" Renshaw asked, ignoring Imani and speaking directly to the agent. "Name on the ticket doesn't match the ID perfectly. System locked her out, Kevin mumbled. She's refusing the reticketing option. Ma'am, you need to either follow the agent's instructions or step out of the line, Renshaw said to Imani, his voice hardening. You're holding everyone up. I will not step out of the line, Imani replied, her voice dangerously quiet. I will stand here until I speak with a manager who can apply common sense to this situation. I am a paying customer with a valid ticket for a flight that is about to board. This was the challenge Renshaw had been waiting for. It was his moment to assert dominance. Ma'am, I'm giving you a lawful order to step aside. You are a private contractor for the airline, not a law enforcement officer, Imani corrected him coolly. Your order has no legal weight. Get me your manager. A small crowd was now beginning to form. Phones, as they always do, began to emerge from pockets. The red light of a recording phone is the modern world's spotlight, and it was now shining on them. Renshaw's face flushed a deep, angry red. You want to play it that way, fine. He reached for his radio. Dispatch, I have a non-compliant individual at the K-19 service desk, refusing to follow instructions, causing a disturbance. Need backup. Imani watched him incredulous. This was an absurd theatrical escalation. You are creating a disturbance where none existed, she said, her voice shaking slightly with rage. This is about a ticket. It's about security now, Renshaw snarled. Two more Ascendair contractors, younger and bigger than Renshaw, arrived within a minute. Ma'am, last chance. Step away from the counter, or we will physically remove you, Renshaw commanded, puffing out his chest. Imani stood her ground. It wasn't about the flight anymore. It was about the sheer, unadulterated injustice of it. It was about every time she'd been underestimated, second-guessed, or treated as less than because of her race or her gender. She had built an empire to insulate herself from this, and here it was raw and ugly in the middle of a public terminal. Don't you dare touch me, she warned, her eyes blazing. That was all the invitation Renshaw needed. Okay, that's it. He grabbed her left arm. One of the other guards grabbed her right. Imani was strong, but she was no match for two men trained in physical restraint. Her bespoke suit jacket ripped at the shoulder seam. Her leather carry-on tumbled to the floor, spilling a sheaf of confidential Aerovantis financial projections across the dirty linoleum. And then they began to drag her. The humiliation was absolute. It was a physical violation, compounded by public spectacle. Her heels scraped against the floor. People gasped. The phone cameras followed her every move. They weren't just escorting her. They were making an example of her. They dragged her 20 yards away from the counter across the main thoroughfare of the terminal and deposited her in a heap near a trash can. Renshaw stood over her, breathing heavily. Had enough, he sneered. Imani pushed herself up her body, trembling with a mixture of shock and a white-hot fury she had not felt in decades. Her cobalt blue suit was ruined. Her dignity was in tatters. She looked at Renshaw, at the gawking crowd, at the smug face of the airline that had just assaulted her. She slowly, deliberately reached into her ruined jacket and pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely unlock it. She didn't call the police. She didn't call a lawyer. She made a single call. "Julian," she said, her voice a raw whisper of ice and steel. "It's Imani." Julian Vance was her chief operating officer and her most trusted lieutenant. "Imani, what's wrong? You sound... Shut down all Ascend Air operations at WWR Pinewood and Silver Creek, effective immediately." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "What, Imani? We can't just..." There are contracts, FAA regulations. The contract has a clause for gross misconduct and actions that damage the Aerovantis brand. She hissed the words, tasting like acid. An airline that employs thugs to physically assault its passengers in public has met that criteria. Their staff just assaulted me, the CEO of this company, in the middle of O'Hare. She took a shaky breath. They dragged me across the floor, Julian. The silence on the other end was now one of dawning horror. Consider their leases terminated, their landing rights revoked, their gate access codes deactivated. I want their planes on the ground at our airports to be impounded. I want every single Ascend Air sign ripped from our terminals by morning. Use the emergency provisions. Cite security and safety concerns based on their contractors' violent behavior. I want a press release drafted in 1 hour. Title it, Aerovantis Group terminates relationship with Ascend Air due to unacceptable safety standards and passenger abuse. And Julian, yes, Imani, get me Richard Sterling's personal cell phone number. He and I are going to have a conversation. She clicked off the phone, her gaze sweeping across the terminal, a desolate landscape of her own humiliation. The fury was now crystallizing into something much colder, much heavier, and infinitely more dangerous resolve. Ascend Air had picked a fight not knowing they'd chosen to brawl with the woman who owned the ground they stood on. The ensuing 60 minutes were a masterclass in corporate warfare, executed with the ruthless precision of a military strike. While Imani sat on a cold terminal bench, fielding a call from a genuinely apologetic but powerless Chicago PD officer, the machinery of the Aerovantis Group roared to life. Julian Vance, a man known for his unflappable demeanor, moved with a controlled fury. He convened an emergency virtual meeting with Aerovantis' legal operations and communications heads. The first words out of his mouth were, "This is not a drill. We are initiating a Code Omega shutdown on a key partner." The legal team, led by a shark named Evelyn Reed, immediately pulled up the master agreement with Ascend Air. It was a document Imani herself had helped architect. Buried in Section 11, subsection B, was the clause she had referred to, the Brand Integrity and Safety Clause. It stated that Aerovantis could, at its sole discretion, suspend or terminate all services without the standard 90-day notice period if the lessee Ascend Air or its agents engaged in behavior that constituted a clear and present danger to passengers or brought significant disrepute upon the operational standards of an Aerovantis-managed facility. "Did they assault her on our property?" Evelyn asked, her voice sharp. "No, O'Hare," Julian replied. "But the clause isn't site-specific. It refers to the lessee's general conduct. Their agent's behavior, which is now going viral on Twitter, is the definition of significant disrepute. It's an attack on our CEO. We can argue it creates a fundamental breach of trust and safety partnership. It's aggressive, but it's defensible." Simultaneously, the operations team began executing the shutdown. At Westwood Regional in Colorado, the airport director personally walked to the Ascend Air gates. He informed the stunned station manager that effective immediately, their gate lease was suspended. The jet bridges were retracted from the 2 Ascend Air planes currently at the gates. The digital screens above the counters, which had moments before displayed Ascend Air to Dallas, Fort Worth, now simply read, "Flight cancelled." In North Carolina, the Pinewood Aerodrome's logistics manager sent a digital command that locked out Ascend Air's cargo bay doors. A multi-million-dollar shipment of microchips destined for Austin was now stuck on the tarmac. At Silver Creek, Arizona, an inbound Ascend Air flight from Los Angeles was informed via air traffic control that they were being denied landing rights. The pilot, confused and angry, demanded a reason. The reason radioed back was chillingly vague. Per airport authority, your carrier is currently non-compliant with facility operational standards. You must divert. Panic rippled through Ascendair's corporate structure long before the news hit the public. Flight dispatchers saw their routes to 3 key airports turn red on their screens. Station managers were calling headquarters screaming that they were being locked out. The dominoes were falling, but no one knew who was pushing them. Meanwhile, Imani had been escorted to a private lounge by O'Hare's own management, who were now in full-blown panic mode, having realized exactly who Mark Renshaw had assaulted. They offered apologies, water medical attention. Imani ignored them. She was watching the video of her own assault on her phone, which a stranger had already posted to X, formerly Twitter, with the caption "Ascend Air Security Attacks Woman at O'Hare over a ticket dispute. Unbelievable." It had 1,000 retweets in 10 minutes. Her phone rang. The caller ID read, Richard Sterling. She let it ring twice, then answered, putting it on speaker. "Imani, what in God's name is going on?" Sterling's voice was a cocktail of confusion and arrogance. "I'm getting calls that you're shutting us out of Westwood and Pinewood. This has to be some kind of catastrophic system error." "There is no error, Richard," Imani said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "It is a deliberate, methodical, and punitive action." "Punitive for what?" "We have a contract. My lawyers will have your head on a platter. You can't just—" "Richard," she interrupted, and the single word sliced through his tirade, silencing him. "An hour ago at your customer service desk at Gate K19, here at O'Hare, your employee Kevin refused to correct a minor clerical error on my ticket. His supervisor was unavailable. When I refused to be extorted into buying a new ticket, your security contractor, a man named Mark Renshaw, accused me of being non-compliant." She paused, letting the silence stretch. Sterling said nothing. "He and 2 of his colleagues then physically assaulted me. They tore my clothes. They threw my belongings to the floor. And they dragged me, Richard. They dragged me across the terminal floor, in front of hundreds of people with their phones out." A heavy, choked silence filled the lounge. Sterling was clearly speechless. "So yes, Richard," Imani continued, her voice now, a low, menacing whisper. "I did just. The brand integrity clause. Look it up. Your airline's conduct has brought disrepute and demonstrated a fundamental disregard for passenger safety. And as the primary victim of that conduct, I am exercising our right to terminate. Effective immediately." "Imani, I had no idea," Sterling stammered. "This is unacceptable. It's a rogue employee. A contractor. I'll have him fired. I'll have his entire company's contract pulled. You'll do nothing, because you no longer have a say," Imani stated flatly. "This is not about one employee, Richard. This is about a culture. A culture you've fostered. One that allows a Kevin to be dismissive and a Renshaw to be violent. You don't get to fire one man and pretend the problem is solved." At that exact moment, the Aerovantis press release hit the newswires. The Associated Press, Reuters, Bloomberg, they all picked it up within seconds. The headline was explosive. Phones began to buzz across the financial world. The headline read, "Aerovantis Group, owner of 3 regional hubs, immediately terminates all contracts with Ascend, Air, citing systemic safety failures and violent conduct towards passengers." The release went on to detail that the decision was made following a disturbing incident involving a senior executive and that Aerovantis could no longer in good conscience expose passengers at its facilities to an airline with such dangerously lax operational oversight. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. Ascendair's stock, which had been trading at a stable $45 a share, began to hemorrhage value in after-hours trading. The combination of losing 3 key airports and the PR nightmare of being publicly branded as violent was a death blow to investor confidence. The stock plunged 10%, then 20%, then 30%. Hundreds of millions of dollars in market capitalization were evaporating every minute. Back in the lounge, Richard Sterling was watching the same ticker on his own phone. He was no longer trying to reason with Imani. He was pleading. "Imani, please. You're destroying us. This will bankrupt the company. Think of the employees, the shareholders. We can fix this. I'll fly to Chicago right now. I will get on my knees and apologize. Whatever you want." Imani listened to his pleas, her face an unreadable mask. The humiliation of being dragged across the floor was still a fresh, raw wound. His panic was the only balm she had. "What do I want, Richard?" she said softly, almost to herself. "I want you to feel a fraction of the helplessness I felt. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. You built your airline on a foundation of cutting corners and treating people as disposable. Today, your foundation cracked." She stood up, her ruined suit hanging off her frame. "My flight to Denver has unfortunately been disrupted. I will be taking my company jet instead. You, on the other hand, have bigger problems. You have 37 cancelled flights tonight, thousands of stranded passengers, and a stock price that is currently in freefall. I suggest you get to work." She hung up the phone. She walked out of the lounge, head held high, ignoring the frantic apologies of the O'Hare staff. She had absorbed the ultimate humiliation, and she had responded by unleashing a hurricane. For a moment it felt like justice. It felt like victory. But the real karma of the universe is a far more complicated and far more painful beast. And its bill had yet to come due. The first 24 hours were a heady rush of vindication for Imani Carter. The story was everywhere. The viral video of her assault juxtaposed with the news of her devastating corporate retaliation created a narrative of perfect cinematic justice. She was lauded on social media as a hero, a boss who had delivered a long-overdue comeuppance to a faceless, abusive corporation. The hashtag #FlyAerovantis trended ironically, while #boycott. Ascendair became a global phenomenon. Ascendair was in a death spiral. Richard Sterling had fired Mark Renshaw, and his entire security firm issued a groveling public apology and even suspended the Kevin from the service desk. But it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. The damage was done. Their stock stabilized at a 48% loss, wiping out nearly $1 billion of value. Lenders grew nervous. Other airports began reviewing their contracts. Ascendair was radioactive. Imani, back in the pristine, controlled environment of her Denver headquarters, watched it all unfold with a grim sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served, swift and absolute. Then the first cracks appeared in her victory. The first call came from Mayor Thompson of Westwood, Colorado. Westwood wasn't just a town with an airport. It was an airport with a town attached. The entire local economy was built on the seasonal tourism that flowed through Westwood Regional Airport, WWR. "Dr. Carter," the mayor said, his voice strained. We have a problem. Ascendair was our primary carrier. They brought in 60% of our winter traffic. Their last flight was yesterday. Their next one is never. My town is panicking. They are an unsafe airline, Mayor, Imani replied coolly. I'm protecting passengers and my company's reputation. We're already in talks with United and American to see if they can pick up the routes. Pick up the routes, Dr. Carter, that takes months. We need planes next week. The ski lodges have a 90% booking rate. The shuttle drivers, the restaurants, the ski instructors, they're all going to be wiped out if those tourists don't come. My town is facing an economic catastrophe because of a dispute that happened in Chicago. Imani felt a prickle of irritation. This was collateral damage. It was unfortunate, but necessary. I understand your concern, Mayor, but my decision is final. The second crack came from within her own company. Julian Vance entered her office, closing the door behind him. He looked tired. The Pinewood situation is getting complicated, he said, foregoing any pleasantries. That cargo shipment we impounded, it wasn't just microchips. It contained a specialized component for Medtronic, the medical device company. They're telling us it's part of a time-sensitive production run for a new type of pacemaker. They say our dispute is now threatening the supply chain for a life-saving device. That's Ascendair's liability, not ours, Imani said, though a sliver of doubt entered her mind. Legally, yes, Julian countered. Optically, the headlines are starting to shift. The initial story was, Black CEO gets justice. The new stories are CEO's revenge strands passengers, cripples, towns, halts medical supplies. We're starting to look less like the hero and more like the villain. Imani stood up and walked to the vast window overlooking the Denver skyline. They dragged me on the floor, Julian. The words were quiet, but they carried the full weight of her remembered humiliation. There must be a price for that. And they're paying it, Julian said gently. They're on the brink of collapse. But are we calculating the cost to everyone else? To us, the FAA has opened a formal inquiry into the summary termination of landing rights. The pilots' union is filing a grievance. We won, Imani. The question is, should we keep pressing the boot on their throat when innocent people are underneath? That night, Imani couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the faces. Not Renshaw's sneering face, but the imagined faces of a hotel cleaner in Westwood, a truck driver at Pinewood, a patient waiting for a pacemaker. Her act of focused, righteous revenge had been a stone thrown into a pond, but the ripples were spreading farther and wider than she had ever intended, and they were beginning to swamp innocent boats. This was the hard karma. It wasn't some cosmic force striking down Richard Sterling with a bolt of lightning. It was subtler, more insidious. The karma was the consequence of her own power. The universe was showing her that an eye for an eye, when you wielded the power she did, could blind the whole world. Her victory felt hollow, tainted by the suffering it was causing. She had wanted to punish a corporation, but she was hurting communities. The final devastating blow came from the National Weather Service. A Category 4 hurricane named Leo had unexpectedly intensified in the Gulf of Mexico and was now barreling towards the Louisiana and Mississippi coasts. Evacuation orders were issued for hundreds of thousands of people. The problem was that the region was served by a network of smaller airports, many of which had limited capacity. FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, was coordinating a massive airlift. They needed every available plane. And Ascendair had a unique advantage. A few years prior, in a bid to serve niche markets, they had purchased a fleet of Boeing 737-700s, configured for combi use, half passenger, half cargo, and certified for short runway landings. They were the perfect planes for rapidly evacuating people and supplies from smaller, flood-prone airfields. Imani's phone rang at 2 a.m. It was a deputy director from FEMA. "Dr. Carter," the man's voice was grim and urgent. "I'm calling about Ascend Air. We know about your dispute. Frankly, I don't care about it right now. What I care about is that they have a dozen 737s sitting idle that are perfectly suited for this evacuation. But their primary maintenance and staging hub for that fleet is your facility at Pinewood Aerodrome." Imani felt a cold dread creep up her spine. "Their crews are there," the FEMA director continued. "The planes are there, but they're grounded by your order. We need those planes in the air 6 hours ago. People's lives are at stake. I need you to lift the restriction and grant them emergency landing rights at the coastal airports we're using as evacuation points." There it was, the ultimate moral test. Her personal war of justice was now standing in the way of saving human lives. Sticking to her guns meant potentially sentencing people to death by hurricane. Relenting meant giving Richard Sterling a lifeline. It meant sacrificing her perfect righteous victory on the altar of the greater good. She could see the headlines now. Controversial CEO blocks hurricane evacuation. Her meticulously built reputation, her entire life's work, would be defined by that one selfish decision. The hard karma wasn't that she would be punished. The hard karma was that she was now being forced to choose between her own pride and other people's lives. The power she had used to exact revenge was now a weapon pointed at her own soul. "Give me 1 hour," she told the FEMA director, her voice hoarse. She hung up the phone and stared into the darkness. She had broken Ascend Air. Now she realized with sickening clarity she was going to have to be the one to put it back together. Imani didn't call Julian. She didn't call her lawyers. There was only one person she needed to speak to. She found Richard Sterling's number and dialed. He answered on the first ring, his voice sounding ragged and defeated. "Sterling?" "It's Imani Carter," she said, her tone all business. "A FEMA director just called me. I know about Hurricane Leo. I know you have the combi jets we need, sitting at Pinewood." There was a pause, then Sterling let out a bitter, weary laugh. "Oh, that's rich. That is just beautiful. The universe has a sick sense of humor. So now you hold my company in one hand and hurricane victims in the other. What's the price, Imani? What pound of flesh do you want from me now to save those people?" "This isn't about a price," Imani said, and for the first time her voice lacked its icy edge. It was just tired. "This is about a solution. I am prepared to lift the restriction on your 737s at Pinewood and grant you temporary operating authority to assist with the FEMA evacuation." Sterling was silent, clearly stunned by the lack of a demand. "But," Imani continued, "this is not a return to business as usual. This is a ceasefire, not a peace treaty. When this storm passes, you and I are going to meet. And we are going to negotiate the terms of your airline's continued existence as it relates to my airports. Because I will let your planes fly to save lives, but I will not let your company off the hook for what it is." "Whatever you want, Imani," Sterling said, the fight gone from his voice. "Just tell me what to do." "Get your crews ready. I'm lifting the order in 5 minutes." She hung up and made the call to her operations center at Pinewood. The order was given: release Ascend Air assets for FEMA-directed emergency operations. Within the hour, the roar of jet engines filled the North Carolina night as the first of the combi jets lifted off, heading for the storm-ravaged coast. A week later, Hurricane Leo was a memory, and thousands of people were safe in no small part due to the Ascend Air airlift. The media narrative had shifted again. Ascend Air, the pariah, was now the reluctant hero, and Dr. Imani Carter was the enigmatic figure who had enabled it. The meeting took place in a neutral location, a sterile conference room at a hotel near Dulles International Airport. Imani arrived first. When Richard Sterling walked in, he looked like a different man. The brash confidence was gone, replaced by a deep-set weariness. He'd lost $1 billion, his reputation, and nearly his entire company in the span of a week. "Imani," he said, simply nodding as he sat down. Imani didn't waste time with pleasantries. She slid a single 10-page document across the table. "This is the price, Richard. Not for the hurricane, for what happened at O'Hare. This is the new cost of doing business with Aerovantis." Sterling picked it up and read. His eyes widened. It wasn't a financial document. It was a manifesto. The terms were draconian and revolutionary. 1. The Renshaw Protocol at Ascend Air would fund a $50 million independent trust administered by a third party, dedicated to retraining all customer-facing airline and contractor staff industry-wide in de-escalation and implicit bias. The man who had assaulted her would have his name attached to the program, designed to prevent it from ever happening again. A particularly poetic form of justice. 2. Executive accountability. A new position. Chief of Passenger Advocacy would be created at the C-suite level of Ascend Air, with veto power over any new customer service policy. The first appointee would have to be approved by a committee that included Imani Carter. 3. Total transparency. Ascend Air would implement a real-time, public-facing online portal, tracking all customer complaints, their resolution, and the disciplinary action taken against employees. 4. Community reinvestment. For every dollar of profit Ascend Air made from routes flying into Westwood Pinewood or Silver Creek, 10 cents would be invested into a community fund for that town managed by the mayor's office. 5. The apology. Richard Sterling would not just issue a press release. He would film a formal multi-million-dollar ad campaign. In it, he would detail the incident with Dr. Carter, apologize personally and unequivocally, and introduce these new programs as the airline's penance and path forward. Sterling read the last page and set the document down, looking not at Imani but at his own hands on the table. This isn't a contract. It's a public flogging. "It's a blueprint for change," Imani corrected him. "You asked what I wanted. I don't want your money. I don't want your company to fail and put thousands of people out of work. I want you to fix the rot that allowed a man like Renshaw to feel empowered to do what he did. I want to ensure that the next black woman who questions a stupid policy is met with respect, not violence. You can't give me back my dignity from that moment, but you can build a system that honors the dignity of others." Sterling was silent for a full minute. He looked up and his eyes met hers. "You could have just let us die," he said quietly. "You held all the cards. You still do." "Letting you die would have been easy," Imani said, standing up. "Making you better is hard. That's the real power. Sign it, Richard, or don't. Either way, I've made my point." He watched her for a moment, then picked up a pen and signed his name. The old Ascend Air died in that room. A new one, born of humiliation and forced into accountability, was beginning. Imani Carter had been dragged across a terminal flaw, a victim of petty authority and systemic prejudice. But in the end, she didn't just get revenge. She used her immense power not just to tear down, but to rebuild. She had absorbed the hard karma of her own actions and channeled it into something transformative. She hadn't just terminated an airline's access to her airports. She had terminated its access to its own worst instincts, forcing it and the entire industry to look in the mirror and finally change. 1 year later, the aviation industry was a different landscape. The airline once known as Ascend Air had survived, but it was deeply scarred and fundamentally altered. It now flew under the name Ascend Air Forward, a rebranding that was both a marketing necessity and a public admission of its past sins. The airline's stock had recovered but slowly, like a patient learning to walk again. It was no longer known for aggressive expansion, but for something far more radical in the budget carrier space obsessive customer care. The Renshaw Protocol had become an unlikely industry standard. Other airlines, watching Ascend Air's painful but ultimately successful transformation, began adopting similar training modules. The idea that de-escalation and cultural sensitivity weren't just woke buzzwords, but were actually sound financial and risk management strategies began to take hold. Richard Sterling, once the poster boy for corporate hubris, had become a reluctant evangelist for passenger advocacy. He spoke at industry events not with the swagger of a CEO, but with the sober humility of a man who had stared into the abyss of bankruptcy and been pulled back by the very person he had allowed his company to wrong. Dr. Imani Carter watched all of this from the quiet, data-driven world of Aerovantis. She had reinstated Ascend Air Forward's leases at her 3 airports, and their payments, including the community reinvestment fees, arrived like clockwork. The mayors of Westwood, Pinewood, and Silver Creek now sat on the boards of those community funds, directing airline profits into local libraries, infrastructure, and scholarships. The system she had designed out of fury and necessity was working, yet a part of her remained detached, waiting. A blueprint is not a building. A policy is not a culture. She was waiting for the true test. And what of Mark Renshaw? He had not simply been fired, he had become infamous. The video of him dragging a CEO across a terminal floor made him unemployable. No security firm would touch him. He had tried to sue Ascend Air for wrongful termination, but his case was thrown out. He became a cautionary tale, a ghost haunting the industry he was exiled from. He found a bitter solace in the dark corners of the internet, becoming a minor celebrity on fringe podcasts, where he railed against cancel culture and corporate elites. In his version of the story, he was the victim, a hard-working man, just doing his job, destroyed by a powerful, vindictive woman. He never once acknowledged the violence of his actions, only the totality of his ruin. The karma that had hit him wasn't a lesson. It was simply a grievance. The true test of Imani's new world came on a rainy Thursday at Newark Liberty International. An Ascend Air Forward flight to San Francisco was delayed due to mechanical issues. Tensions were high. At the gate, a young man, a college student and activist with a significant social media following, was becoming increasingly agitated. His ticket had been booked through a third-party site that had just gone bankrupt, and his confirmation code wasn't showing up in Ascend Air's system. It was a complex, frustrating situation, the kind that a year ago would have been a powder keg. The gate agent, a young woman named Maria, who had been through the Renshaw Protocol 3 times, felt her heart pound. She could see the young man was filming her with his phone, his voice getting louder. "So you're just going to steal my money? This is a scam. I know how you people operate," he shouted. The old training would have told her to call security immediately. But the new training, the protocol born from Imani's humiliation, told her to do the opposite. She took a deep breath, made eye contact, and did not rise to the bait. "Sir, I can see how frustrating this is, and I want you to know I am on your side," she said, her voice calm and even. "The company you booked with has unfortunately ceased operations, and they didn't transfer the funds to us. But you're here, and we need to get you to San Francisco. Let's solve this." Instead of calling for a man with a badge, she pressed a button on her computer that sent a silent alert to the passenger advocacy team. Within 2 minutes, a woman in a simple blue blazer, no uniform, no badge of authority arrived. She introduced herself as a passenger advocate. She listened to the young man's entire story without interruption. Then she said, "You're right to be angry, but your anger is with a company that no longer exists. Our gate agent is trying to help. Here's what we are going to do. I am personally authorizing a new complimentary ticket for you on this flight. We will then handle the fraud claim against the third-party site on your behalf. You won't have to do a thing. We just want to make sure you get home safely." The young man was stunned into silence. He lowered his phone. The anger drained from his face, replaced by confusion, then relief. For real, the advocate said with a smile. "Welcome aboard, ascend, air forward." The crisis had been averted. The young man later posted the video, but with a caption that read, "Was about to go to war with that ascend air forward over a ticket issue. But they showed me what real customer service looks like." Shocked. They just got a customer for life. Imani saw the post. She leaned back in her chair in her Denver office and felt a sense of satisfaction that was deeper and more profound than the day she'd watched Ascend Air's stock price collapse. This was the true victory, not the punishment of the guilty, but the protection of the innocent. Her victory, however, was not without its final echo. Later that month, she was the keynote speaker at the Global Aviation Summit in Washington, D.C. As she was leaving the main hall, a voice cut through the crowd. "Dr. Carter." She turned. It was Mark Renshaw. He looked gaunt, haunted. His eyes burned with a mixture of rage and desperation. He wasn't aggressive, not physically. He was something worse, a man consumed by his own victimhood. "I just wanted to see the woman who ruined my life," he said, his voice raspy. "Are you proud? You sit up there talking about the future of flight. I don't have a future. I lost my house, my family, all because I did my job." The old Imani, the one forged in fire and fury, would have cut him down with a sentence. But she was no longer that person. She looked at the pathetic figure before her and felt not anger, but a vast, weary pity. "Mr. Renshaw," she said, her voice calm, devoid of malice. "I didn't ruin your life. Your actions did. What you did to me was a choice. You chose aggression over communication. You chose force over respect. The consequences of that choice are your own." "It was a mistake," he pleaded. "One mistake." "It was," Imani agreed. "And to make sure it never happens again, a $50 million program now exists with your name on it. A program that teaches people how not to make the mistake you did. Hundreds of airline employees have now been trained to handle conflict with dignity. Perhaps that's your legacy, Mr. Renshaw. Not the life you lost, but the countless humiliations you've inadvertently prevented." She held his gaze for a moment longer, offering no forgiveness but no further condemnation. She had nothing left to say to him. His fate was no longer her concern. She had already built the system to contain men like him. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the crowd. Her victory was no longer about a single man or a single airline. It was in the quiet, unseen moments on the concourse, in the averted crisis at the gate, in the simple act of a passenger being treated with respect. It was in the incident that didn't happen. That was her real power. That was her lasting karma. 3 years had passed. The storm had long since settled, and a new quiet equilibrium had taken its place. Ascend Air Forward was no longer a cautionary tale, but a case study taught at Harvard Business School. Its stock was stable, its customer satisfaction scores were the highest in the sector, and the community reinvestment funds in Colorado, North Carolina, and Arizona had become models of corporate civic partnership funding, everything from new playground equipment to tech labs in local high schools. Dr. Imani Carter had moved on. The Ascend Air saga felt like a lifetime ago, a brutal war she had won, and was content to leave in the past. Aerovantis was thriving with its sights, set on an ambitious expansion into the European private airport market. She had successfully compartmentalized the incident. It was a problem she had solved. The file was closed. She had never wanted to be a crusader. She was a builder, an engineer, a CEO. The role of industry moralist was one she had never auditioned for, and did not want. The past, however, has a habit of requesting a follow-up meeting. It arrived in the form of a frantic call from Richard Sterling. "Imani, I need to see you. Urgently." The voice on the phone was one she barely recognized. The humbled, defeated man from their last encounters was gone. So was the arrogant braggart from before. This Richard Sterling was energized sharp and sounded genuinely alarmed. She agreed to meet more out of curiosity than anything else. He walked into her Denver office looking trim and focused, laying a tablet on her glass desk with a grim finality. "Meet Apex Air," he said. Imani read the profile. Apex Air was a new ultra-low-cost carrier, tearing through the domestic market like a wildfire. It was founded and run by a notoriously ruthless tycoon named Silas Thorne, a man known in the industry as the Scythe, for his ability to cut costs, contracts, and personnel to the bone. Apex's business model was a masterclass in predatory capitalism. They charged for everything from carry-on bags to printing a boarding pass at the airport. Their employee contracts were paper-thin, their turnaround times were brutal, and their customer service was legendarily non-existent. They were in essence the ghost of the old Ascend Air, but on steroids and with no shame. "They're cannibals, Imani," Sterling said, pacing in front of her window. "They undercut our fares by 40%, run at a loss, to drive us out of a market, and then jack up the prices once the competition is dead. They're everything we used to be, but worse, and they're winning." Imani felt a familiar coldness. "That is an industry problem, Richard, not my problem." "It's about to be," he countered, pointing to the tablet again. He swiped to a new document. It was a formal multi-million-dollar bid proposal. They want to make Pinewood Aerodrome their primary East Coast hub. They're offering Aerovantis leasing fees that are 25% higher than what I'm paying you. Your board is going to get this tomorrow morning." Imani froze. Pinewood, her airport, her meticulously managed system. The thought of Silas Thorne's toxic, high burn rate culture infecting her facility felt like a physical violation. She knew what this meant. Her own board, legally bound by fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder profit, would be hard-pressed to refuse such a lucrative offer. She would be forced to welcome the very plague she'd fought so hard to eradicate back into her own house. "I'll fight it," Imani said, her voice low. "How?" Sterling shot back. You reject their superior financial offer on what grounds? A gut feeling. A moral objection. Thorne will sue you for anti-competitive practices and he'll win. He knows the game. Unless... He stopped pacing and looked at her directly. Unless the rules of the game are different at Aerovantis airports. Not just for me. For everyone. Imani stared at him, understanding dawning. What are you proposing? Don't just reject Apex, Sterling urged, leaning over her desk. Make it impossible for companies like Apex to exist on your property. Codify the terms you forced on me. Create a charter for ethical aviation. Make the Renshaw Protocol real passenger advocacy community reinvestment and employee welfare standards, a mandatory condition for any airline to lease a gate or land on your runways. Make decency a non-negotiable cost of doing business with you. Imani felt a wave of profound resistance. Richard, I am not the FAA. I am not the queen of the airline industry. I fixed my problem with you. I don't want this fight. You don't have a choice anymore, he insisted, his voice passionate. You started this. You prove that a better way is possible, and more importantly, that it's profitable. But that ecosystem is fragile. It needs a guardian. If you let Thorne in all of it, everything we built, my redemption, your legacy. It all comes crashing down. You're the only one with the power and the credibility to hold the line. She looked out the window at the distant mountains. He was right. Her victory hadn't been an end state. It had been the creation of a standard. And a standard is meaningless if it is not defended. With a heavy sigh, she realized her war was not over. It had only entered a new phase. The battle was swift and brutal. As Sterling predicted, the Aerovantis board was enthralled by the Apex bid. Imani's CFO argued forcefully that rejecting it would be a dereliction of duty. In the press, Silas Thorne himself publicly mocked her. Dr. Carter wants to be Pope, he told a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. But she's running an airport, not a church. Her ethical charter is a smokescreen for cronyism protecting her friends at Ascend Air. Imani refused to engage in a public spat. Instead, she prepared for the decisive board meeting. She presented her charter not as a moral document, but as a risk mitigation strategy. She used data to show how high-conflict customer service models like Apex's led to higher security costs litigation and brand damage that would ultimately tarnish Aerovantis itself. But the numbers were still tilted in Apex's favor. As the board prepared to vote, it was clear she was losing. Before we vote, Imani said, her voice steady, I have invited a guest to share his perspective on the long-term value of our brand integrity. The conference room doors opened, and Richard Sterling walked in. The board was stunned into silence. He wasn't the competitor they expected. He was a witness. He spoke for 10 minutes without notes. He told them about the day his stock collapsed. He told them about the shame of watching the video of Imani's assault. He told them how he had hated her for the terms she'd imposed. And then he told them how those terms had saved him, how a focus on dignity had rebuilt his workforce's morale, how a transparent complaints process had turned angry customers into loyal ones. What Dr. Carter is asking you to protect, he finished, looking around the table at the stunned faces, isn't a feeling. It's an asset. It's the most valuable asset you have, your reputation. Silas Thorne sells cheap seats. Aerovantis, under her leadership, sells something far more valuable and harder to build trust. Don't sell it for a 25% premium. It's worth so much more. He nodded to Imani and walked out. The room was silent. The CFO looked down at his papers, his arguments about fiduciary duty suddenly sounding hollow. The vote was called. Imani won. By a single vote. The Charter for Ethical Aviation became binding policy across the Aerovantis group. Apex Air's bid was formally rejected not on moral grounds but for failure to meet the new mandatory operational and safety standards of the Aerovantis airport network. It was a quiet, seismic victory. Imani Carter sat alone in her office that evening, watching the city lights begin to glow. She had never wanted this. She had never wanted to be a guardian, a standard bearer, a regulator. But she understood now that power once used so decisively leaves a permanent obligation in its wake. She had been dragged across a terminal floor and had responded by changing an airline. Now she had been challenged again and had responded by fortifying an entire ecosystem. Her victory wasn't a single event, but a continuous, unwilling, and necessary vigilance. She was Dr. Imani Carter, and she was holding the line. The story of Dr. Imani Carter isn't just a fantasy about revenge. It's a powerful lesson in consequence and the true nature of power. It shows that the greatest strength isn't just in the ability to punish our enemies, but in the wisdom to demand they become better. Her journey from public humiliation to industry-wide reformer reminds us that sometimes the most painful moments can become the catalyst for the most profound changes. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in accountability and the power of one person to make a difference, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story about justice, karma, and the incredible twists of real life. What did you think of Imani's final decision? Let me know in the comments below.